So one of the great fun details with the Nancy Bird are the optional strap connectors. Now you don't have to do these. You can use uh, a strap connector following the instructions. You can do a hidden strap connector. You can do just about anything you want, but these give such a nice touch. Now, I have marked the position on the side. You can see you get quite close to where you'll be stitching, but just on the other side of it. They're designed for a leather or a leather-like product, so something that doesn't fray, that you can cut it out and you've got that nice sturdy edge. And if you are using something like leather, you can have a bit of fun experimenting with edge paints. It's just a little piece, it's not too big. Another thing is, don't get too worried about them being perfect. The two are on each side of the bag, so if they don't match, no one's going to notice because they can't compare them side by side. And even if the cutting out's a little bit wonky, nobody's going to notice. They're great for using scrappy bits of leather. Now, there's a few ways that you can cut them out. If you're finding that the piece is sort of moving around, some double-sided tape is absolutely fantastic for holding them in place. You can do all the corners or you can just put a piece in the center. Sort of depends on how slippery your leather is too. That way you can try and maximize using a scrappy piece. Just pop that in there. Now you can use specialist leather pens or something like a gel roller or something that's not going to mark the leather. And most leathers will have the suede or furry side and the hide side. These leather pens will mark suede, and it's always worth testing on a small bit just to make sure that the pen works and that the pen is going to rub off. So you can use one of these pens and trace all the way around the outside. I find that a little bit difficult because I'm just a klutz, and so I end up smudging the pen. You can use scissors. You want some really nice sharp scissors with a good little pointy end. Or my preference is a sharp blade like this. Really just use what works for you. Don't worry too much about that's what that person does, that's what I'm going to do. The way I like to do it is with the sharp blade. Just cut around and move the piece as I cut it around. With leather, you want to take nice long cuts, and even with the scissors, nice long snips around. Don't do jagged bits. And make it as smooth as possible. But again, don't stress because you can come back afterwards with the scissors and neaten it up. Use a sharp blade because the duller the blade, the more likely you are to cut yourself because you'll be pushing so hard and it's really easy for it to sort of knock out of the way. I'm going to start cutting this. Here's the piece cut out. I'm just going to do a tiny bit of a little trim around to get it nice smooth edges. And that the two connectors. The last step is cutting out this piece. So it's going to depend on the strap width. Now, I'm using some webbing. So I'm going to make sure that it's going to fit in there nicely. If your straps are really, really thick, you may need to make that cut just a little bit wider. On this one, this looks perfect. So again, I'm just going to do one long cut all the way along. Again, make sure that that's going to work. So that is one ready to go. This is, again, we're putting some double-sided tape. Can be handy because it stops it moving. And then I'm going to cut the second one. We can always change these after they're sewn on. It's just having that guideline before you start sewing that really, really helps. That is the connectors. The next step is actually sewing the connectors to the gusset piece. Now, you want to use a foot that will glide across the leather and won't get stuck on it. So, walking foot, a roller foot, or a Teflon foot. My personal preference is a Teflon foot, but that's just one of those things of it's going to depend on you and your machine and what works well. I find the walking foot on my machine just sounds terrible. It sounds really clunky, so I prefer the little Teflon foot. You'll want to stitch as close as you can to those edges. So it's really going to depend on your machine. So on mine, on this foot, I find the foot is actually offset slightly, and that gives me the perfect distance away. Now, you can use the pattern piece to help guide you, but basically you want the top of the plane to sit just below the stitch line so that when you sew the pieces together, it's not getting sewn over. I think in pattern 3, so on this piece, I've already prepared it. I've got my deco on the inside, and you want to hold that piece of leather in place. And of course, you can't use pins because pins put holes in things. So double-sided tape or fabric glue are absolutely fantastic. You can use just normal craft glue in a pinch, but for this, I'm going to use some double-sided tape. It's best to try and keep the double-sided tape out of anywhere that you're actually going to stitch. So this can be where a thinner tape is really good because you can put it right in the center of that tail area, so it's well outside your stitch area. You can get some needles, I've heard, that work with glues and tapes. For this, I will be using a plain universal needle. I don't change to anything special, but play around and test out what works with your machine. Each machine's going to be just a little bit different in how it handles leather, what it does, how easy or difficult it is to sew. I'm going to put these little bits just where I'm not stitching. And because there's corners and so many edges on this, I'd rather just do a few extra pieces, have it nice and secure, and not have to worry. So I will check. Want to be well outside that 1 centimeter, 3/8. I'm happy with that. I've got it centered. I'll stick it down. So you can see that that double-sided tape does a great job of holding it all in place. And then I'm going to sew as close as I can to that edge without going over. And this is just one of those things of take your time, go slowly, concentrate, hand wheel on tricky bits. Remembering if you're turning corners, pop that needle all the way down before you lift your foot up and maneuver it around. And remember to breathe. The biggest thing. Don't stress too much. We want finished, not perfect. And that is one of the strap connectors sewn in. I'm going to repeat on the other side. And a trick, if you haven't exactly measured, if you've done a little bit of eyeballing and you want it in the same spot on the other side, pop it down, pop all your tape back down on the same spots. Match them up like that. Match that top raw edge and stick it down. And you'll have it in the same alignment on the other side. Now, I'm not quite happy with this one, and this is the advantage of using that tape or glue, that you can move it. And again, making sure that it's not going to be where you're stitching. So that's about the 1 centimetre 3/8. So I'm quite happy with that. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this side as well. So once your overlays are in place, the next step is strap connectors. Now on this one, I'm going to use webbing because that will match the rest of it. My awesome hardware. So the D-rings. So I'm going to cut the webbing to 10 centimetres. Second piece to the same length. With webbing, it's really important to seal the ends. So you can use glue or you can use a lighter. This will make sure that it doesn't fray. That's why I also like to leave a long tail. Don't melt it too much. You just want it to stop fraying. You don't want it to bead up and make chunky bits that are hard to then sew. And I like to just test, make sure that nothing's going to fray there. Of course, do this in a well-ventilated area. You are melting a plastic. There, it hasn't quite worked, so I'll just trim that and just melt it a little bit more. That's why I always like to check. And take a little bit more time on this step and stop disasters. So these are going to go through awesome rings like this. This is where it helps to have cut out that already, because then we can just use the blade and just go back over where we have already cut. One of those editing cuts where I had to go looking for this. So you've already cut that hole, so that's your guideline. Just carefully go back in and cut all the way along. Remembering that you can make this bigger, it's easier to fix it up afterwards. So that's a little short, so I'm just going to, on each side, just cut just a little bit more. Be very careful. That is looking good. Put the D-ring in. Pull it through to the other side. Just even up those tails. We have a few options here. The rivet is a great way of holding this in place. If your machine's feeling up to it, you can sew a row of stitching just across that raw edge. This is where you probably do want a nice heavy needle, like a jeans needle or a denim needle or even a leather needle. It's just going to depend on your machine, and just go really slowly and stitch across. I like to wait until I've done that row of stitching before I decide where I'm placing the rivet, because that way you're not risking having to puncture the stitches when you put the rivet in. Just do a final little bit of adjustments. It can help if you've got a narrow foot too, or a zipper foot, but because of the leather, I'm going to use my Teflon foot. So that does mean that where the D-ring is going to also depend a little bit on where it sits on the side of my foot of my machine. So next step for me is to sew across just one row of stitching carefully, remembering to breathe. So that's that row of stitching. That's going to hold everything in place. Trim the threads. And so next would be popping in a rivet. And I'm going to put it nicely in the center there. Because I'm using the webbing, when I do puncture the hole for the rivet, I'm going to put glue around, just some fabric glue or something that's going to make sure that that webbing doesn't fray. For the holes, got a few different options of what you can use to make them. So obviously a punch like this, handheld one, it can be great. And then there's also the hammer punches, if you prefer them. And worst case, you can just use an awl and punch through with the awl. So for the connectors, again, using that gap that we've already cut. Making sure you cut through all the layers. See, that's a little narrow again, so I'm just going to make that a little bit wider. That's sitting better. The other side in. Make sure that they're going to look similar. The ends are even. Again, sew across nice and close to that cut edge. That's both of them. Cut off some loose ends. And you can use the template for the rivet placement. It's got the nice spot there, but I'm going to eyeball it. I want it right sort of central, so it's a bit of a feature. I'm going to put that dot there. So you can use a punch and a hammer, a hand punch, a number of different ways of getting that hole in. So one of the hard parts with the hand punch I find is that they just don't have that reach. So that's why I often do end up using a hammer or an awl. With the thickness of this, an awl might be difficult because you're punching through all those layers. So I'm going to go get a hammer and let's hammer a hole in it. For punching holes in leather, I've got a great soft-faced hammer. The advantage of this is it's going to make your punches last longer. And I've got a great little punch set here that I got from a leather shop that has changeable heads, which is super handy. It is hollow point too. That really helps when punching through multiple layers. And what I like to do, line it all up and take as long as you need. You don't have to do one big hammer. What I find sometimes is that it can be a bit tricky getting through all the layers, so just keep working. And that's your hole punched, ready for the rivet. Now, with rivets, it is important to get the right length. You don't want the stem to be too long. You want it to push through, have a little bit showing at the back. And just have that cap settle on nicely. I can see that there's not too much give there, but there's enough that the cap is going to set. And I do use a green rivet press because I just can't hammer rivets in well. So I'm going to repeat that for the other side. Let me get my punch. Do the first line up. Make sure I'm happy with it. Hammer. Yep, I'm happy with that. Grab that rivet. And I know that that cap fits well. I'm going to put my rivets away. And this is where I'm going to put a little bit of glue just to make sure that where I've punched a hole in the webbing, that that's not going to cause fraying down the track. Not really likely to be a big problem, but I just like to be extra careful. So the way I like to do it is actually put it on the post of the rivet. You can use a normal bottle of glue, or these glue pens can be absolutely fantastic for putting a nice good coating all over that rivet. Popping it in. You can even put just a bit extra around the back, let it soak in. Pop that cap on so it's in there nicely, and then set that rivet. Rivet's in. And that is one fantastic strap connector all ready to be sewn in. And repeat on the other side. Glue all over the post. Put it through. Nice big whack of glue on the back there. Cap on. And set that rivet. So that is the strap connectors of the Nancy Bird all done, and we're up to the next step. Bag feet. So there's two main styles of bag feet that I found available. There are the feet that have the two legs that split, and then there are the ones that have a screw. It's all basically the same principle. You want to punch a hole, you want the screw or the legs to go through, and then you want them to flatten on the other side so that they don't come out. It's great when they've got washers, so that's really going to help distribute the load. And this is where keeping scraps and bits and pieces can be really, really handy. So these are some squares of bag batting that I've just kept. So I can use them as an extra large washer if I'm worried about the feet pulling through. With this, I've put deco on, so there's quite a firm layer on the back, and the feet that I'll be using have these great washers that will really sort of distribute the load around, so I'm not as worried. If you're really, really worried, if it's sort of a really high, sort of less so with bag feet, but with other things, you can use some leather, especially kangaroo leather, because it's got amazing stitch tear resistance. So it means even though you've punctured a hole in it, it's going to move around a lot, but it's not going to tear like other materials will. For placement, there's 6 spots. You don't have to use all 6. You could just do the 4 outside ones. And what I like to do is punch a hole in the pattern. It's a little bit difficult here because I've got tape in behind it. But that's going to make it really easy to mark where the holes go. And then on this, it's right on the edge on that fold line. I'm going to go from the inside. I'm going to mark those two. I'm going to mark the center ones. And then I'm going to flip the pattern piece around. And as a check, make sure that those center ones all line up, and they do. Just mark. It's probably going to be quite hard to see those little marks on camera, but it's just the wee spots where it's going to go. So again, you got a few options. You can punch a hole with the awl, which I think will probably work quite well on this because we're not going through as many layers as we were with the connector. And then if you're struggling with that or that's not working, again, you can use a punch. I'm going to just see how we go with an awl. And that's just punched through nice and easily. So that's perfect. So with the split leg type, you push the legs through the hole up to the inside. And then once it's through, open those legs. These legs are a little bit wider than the screws that I'm using, so I'm not going to push this one in because I don't want that hole to be too loose. What I am going to do is put that screw through, make sure it goes through nicely. What I do like to do is press the fabric down a little You can add some fabric glue at this point too, if you're worried about any fraying. And then I like to actually start the feet from the outside first. You can leave the feet installed at this point, or what you can do is punch all the holes, test them, make sure they work, but don't put the feet in. We'll put the feet in at a later step once the bag's assembled, and that way you're not having to worry about sewing next to a foot on this seam. So I'm going to punch all those holes, make sure that it's all ready to go, that the screws fit in nicely. It's not going to be a struggle when we come to actually pop those feet in, and just get it set up. I can see here I've missed one of the marks, so you can get the pattern piece out again, or match these pieces. Make sure everything matches up. I can go through the hole and remark the spot. Punch that through and just make sure those screws fit in, and they do. So I'm not going to install the feet. I'm going to put them aside, and we'll install them once we've assembled most of the bag, because that will make life a lot easier. We're up to the pockets next. Now, it's really important to put a zipper pocket either on the outside or the inside, because we will be turning the bag through. So the pattern is written for putting the pocket on the outside, but you do have the option of putting it on the inside if you're comfortable with changing things up a little bit. I have put the instructions in for drawing this box measuring down, but it's a lot easier to use the pattern piece itself. If you're using something like waterproof canvas, it can be a little bit tricky getting the markings on. I find chalk is fantastic. So cut the pieces out. Don't cut out that box, or don't cut that box out of the fabric piece. Obviously cut it out of the paper piece. That's exactly what I've done. So I'm going to line that all up, and I'm going to draw the ends. And it can be a little bit easier at this step to grab a ruler and use it to connect the two ends together. I find if I'm tracing the box, I go a little bit wonky. So that is that ready to go. And put that pocket piece aside. And then we're going to get the panel. The pocket sits quite low on this bag. The idea behind that was that it's actually a hidden pocket well inside underneath the sleeve. You can, by all means, adjust where the pocket sits. All that you really need to worry about is that the pocket's centered. You can put it up or down. You don't want that bottom edge sitting too low because you'll be sewing there, and the same for the top. So you could pull it up a lot higher. It's just the slip pocket or the luggage sleeve will sit lower, and you'll be able to see that zipper, so it won't be concealed in behind. I'm going to pop this 9 centimeters down. And an easy way of getting it centered is to fold the pieces. And using a cutting mat, put that fold line in, and then match that center fold of the pocket. So let's get this. Nice. So you can pin those corners, or you can use something like masking tape and actually tape everything down, which can be really handy if you're using leather or something that doesn't like to be pinned, or even just the deco. I find that it doesn't love to be punctured. If your machine doesn't love bulk, that's where putting this pocket on the inside can be handy too, because sewing through those layers on the outside can get a little bit bulky. So follow all the same steps. Just pop it on one of the inside panels. Could be super handy in behind the mesh panel if you sort of, again, wanted a nice secure pocket for things. So that is how I'm going to hold this piece in place while I sew around that box. I haven't marked the other lines in. I'll do that after I do this step. I'm going to take my piece. When sewing a zipper pocket, don't start right at the corners. You want to sort of start in a little bit. And on these corners, this is where you want to leave your needle down and pivot that 90 degrees on the corner. You can also backstitch these corners for a bit of extra strength, depending on how your machine goes, how thick you're doing, sort of how confident you are. And you just want to sew all the way around that outside box till you get back to where you started, and I'll stitch over and come back. Sew that last little bit to match. From that. So that is sewn in now. So I can take my trusty bits of tape off. Make sure I'm happy with it. And now this is where we're going to cut through a few more layers. We're going to cut this shape out with those little corner bits. You want to get right into those corners as far as you possibly can without cutting the stitches. If you do cut the stitches, don't panic. We've all done it. What you can do then is just go back a centimetre, backstitch, sew over the top, and come on the other side and sew about a centimetre. Just restitch it. Works perfectly fine. So don't panic if that happens. To get this line started, what I do sometimes is just fold it in half. This doesn't need to be perfect. This is something that's hidden well inside the bag. That corner does get a little tricky with black. So go in as far as you think you need to. You can always come and trim it more later. What I like to do is actually hand press. I find this helps pushing it through, and you can also check that those corners are nice and secure. If you are worried about bulk, you can cut back this deco layer a little bit, maybe half the distance. You don't want to cut it all the way back because it will just pop the stitches. Done that before. But if you cut maybe half of it, it's just going to be a little bit less bulk. And you just want to push that pocket through to the other side. And check those corners as you do it. See if you are going to need to trim in a little bit closer or not. I think I will need to trim a bit further. So I'm going to keep working that and finger press it. And then if I need to, I'll go to the iron and actually press it. Want a nice flat finish on the outside. The inside might be a little bit puckered, but that's okay because that's all going to be hidden by the zipper. So focus on getting that outside looking lovely and smooth. Next step is putting the zipper into the zipper pocket. If you're using zipper tape, make sure that you do put that zipper pull on. It's really easy to forget to do that. So I find putting the zipper tape in at a bit of an angle is the easiest way to get it started. We want 30 centimeters or 12 inches of zipper tape. I put a pin here to mark. Don't use your good don't use your good scissors on zipper teeth. It will blunt them. I've got these great scissors that I got from the hardware store that are just virtually indestructible. So I'm going to mark it. Just do a little snip in to get started and then cut all the way across. And put the rest of that aside for the top zipper. You do want to seal the ends of the zip. So again, your fray stopper glue, the little brush one's great, or use a lighter and melt the ends. And it is really important to seal those ends in because if that starts fraying, you can have the whole zipper fray out. Make sure that they get nice and sealed. Just going to melt both ends. Don't melt it too much because you don't want sort of chunky plastic bits. And again, once it's cooled, I just like to flick at the end and make sure that it's all sealed. You can see we've got a little bit of overhang on each side of the zipper, so that gives us lots to work with. And we're going to put the zipper in and sew all around the box. Now, to hold the zipper in, fabric glue can be absolutely fantastic. So this is the wash away fabric glue. And then double-sided tape. You do want to be careful not to put the double-sided tape where your needle's going to be stitching. It can cause some real problems. Some machines are better than others, but some it will cause skipped stitches or for the stitches to look odd or for it just to be really unhappy in what it's sewing. So always try and keep that tape out of where your machine's stitching. I've got black thread in at the moment, and I think I'll change thread colours. I don't have a nice matching colour, so what I've picked is a grey. The grey is often the best colour to use when you're sort of matching rainbows or bright colours or you're just not sure. It's here it sort of blends into the black, blends into the green, and it's going to be my best option. When I'm putting tape down, I like to move the zipper pull as I'm putting it down because I find where the zipper pull is, it bends the tape a little bit. So by moving that zipper pull, it's just making sure that it's going to sit as straight as possible. The extra thin double-sided tape is fantastic if you can get it. What you want to do is center that zipper in the window. So I like to start at each end and get the teeth in the right spot and then adjust as I go. You can see on the back there's a few pucker marks, and that is because this was quite thick, but I focused on getting that front looking nice because these bits will be hidden under that zipper tape. So I'm going to center that window. Let's work from one side. Pull the zipper, pull up, making sure it's not stuck. It's worth spending a little bit of time here just getting that zipper just where you want it and looking good, nice and centered. So again, don't start right at the corners. Come in a little bit and stitch a box all the way around back to the beginning. When you go over the teeth on each side, hand wheel, just make sure that nothing's going wrong there. And if you count the number of stitches and keep them the same on each end, that's going to make the box an equal size. You know you've got it right then. And of course, when you come to the zipper pull, just move it out of the way. Your machine foot won't love sitting next to the zipper. It'll make it a little bit wonky. So just move that zipper as you need to out of the way as you sew all the way around and get that zipper in. And again, remember to breathe. It's not as scary as it seems. I will just use my normal foot on my machine, but you can absolutely use a zipper foot, especially one of the nice adjustable ones. The zipper feet on my machine, I don't love them, so for me, it's just easier to stick to my normal foot that I know really well. I will change that top stitch colour to the grey. I could go black, I just not completely confident that my top stitching is going to be perfect, so change it to a grey. I'm going to start just past the zipper pull, sew up to this corner. And then I'm going to count the number of stitches. Seven stitches. We'll see if I remember that by the time I get to the other end. Pull it all around. When I get to that zipper pull it out of the way. Seven stitches. So just keep close eye on what's sitting underneath because sometimes it's easy to get stuff caught up. Seven stitches around that corner. Back down the other side. That is my zipper sewn in from that. And you can see on the back that those corners that were not looking so good, you don't see them once the zipper's in. It's all sort of hidden in behind. So that's the zipper in on the front. Now the next step is putting the other side on, and we want to leave a nice generous gap at the base here because that's going to help us turn through. I usually use clips for just about everything. With the waterproof canvas, I'll use clips again. But what I like to do is when I'm leaving a turning gap, I like to do something visual to help my brain remember, don't just sew the whole way around. So I use some different clips. I've got these big clips, which I'm going to put there and there, which will hopefully, when I see them, make my brain think, something different. I like to clip from the bottom. What you'll find happens on zipper pockets is that the side with the zipper will be a little bit shorter at the top because in putting that zipper in, you sort of sucked it inside. So don't stress that they're different. That is just from popping that zipper in. Just make sure this bottom edge where you're leaving the gap is nicely matched up because that will help a lot inside. Some clips along the top. I actually like to sew from this side because it means I know this isn't getting caught in the zipper anywhere. I can keep a really good eye on it. So it's a little bit trickier because you've got to move it out of the way, but it just seems to stop accidents. So back stitch. I like to make the corners a little bit curved just to stop stuff gathering in there. If you've cut your zipper tape a little bit long and it's in the seam, that's fine. Just as always with zipper tape, just hand wheel over. This is where doing it from this side can help because you can just see where it's pulled in a little bit. Just follow the edge and make sure it's all caught in there. And again, don't stress that it doesn't match. As long as it matches at the bottom, that's all that really matters in doing this. that is the zipper pocket almost assembled with that nice turning gap. Now, open zipper. It's so easy to forget that step and not have that zipper open ready to go because we'll be turning through. And if you don't have it open, sometimes it's a bit of a struggle to reach through the bag and open. That's the zipper pocket done. The next step, and it is optional, is the slip pocket or the trolley sleeve. The trolley sleeve will be a piece like this that you can put over the handle of a trolley to make it really good just for travelling. And then the slip pocket won't have this bottom piece, that will be caught in this seam, so it's a nice generous slip pocket. And both of them have that zipper hidden at the back. For this bag, I'll be doing the slip pocket, but it's fairly similar for the sleeve. It's just top and bottom, and there's a gap here. Whereas for this piece, we'll be sewing it in. You will need your two pieces, so your outside and your lining. So here I'm doing a contrast black and using the waterproof canvas. We're going to sew along that top edge. So I still have the grey contrast in, which I'm going to definitely use on the top stitching, so I will leave it for this stitching. I'm going to sew along at 1 centimetre. What I do like to do is fold. So you can do an edge stitch like in dressmaking and not stitch through both sides and just stitch through the line. But I like to put a nice top stitching on. And again, I like to do a finger press, and then if that doesn't work, I then go to the iron. But I think this will work nicely, and maybe I will change to a black for top stitching. I always feel like doing contrast stitching on a video is just asking for something to go terribly, terribly wrong. With top stitching, I like to do a bit at a time. It's not a racetrack. You don't need to finish it all at once. Do a little bit and just keep adjusting and making sure you're happy with how it's sitting. So that is the slip pocket done. If you were doing the luggage sleeve, you do the same thing again on the bottom and turn it inside out. If you find that it doesn't match at the bottom, just trim. The 1 centimeter seam allowance means that there's a lot of forgiveness. Just adjust things to suit. So take the back panel with the zipper in it. Line everything up. Make sure you're nice and happy with where it's sitting. And we're going to baste it in place. So basting's using a really big stitch just to hold things, because we don't want this piece moving around as we're assembling it. We sort of want to turn it from 2 pieces into 1 piece. You want to baste so that it doesn't show once you've done the final assembly. So the stitch length on this, well, the seam allowance rather, is 1 centimeter or 3/8. So you want to make sure that it's 7 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch, just something that's not going to show. And I like to make sure that it's sitting well on both sides, and it is. I'm happy with that. So what I'm going to do is baste to here, but I'm not going to sew the corners. Baste across the bottom and baste across there. Just holding it in place, and I'm going to use that 7 millimeter, 1/4 of an inch, or even narrower. The one other step is you can sew in a little bit on each side. And what that does is it helps stop the pocket from gaping too much. I'm going to grab that ruler again. So the seam allowance is 1 centimeter. I think for this one, I'm going to come in 3 centimeters. I think that's just going to look good. So I'm going to put a pin at 3 centimeters. I'm going to do the same on the other side. You sew over the top of that top stitching that you did for that pocket piece. One side, just trim some of those threads out. It just does that nice little bit of a hold. The other side. Again, I'm going to trim just some of those threads so that they don't get in the way. And that's the slip pocket on the back ready to go. It just hides the zipper pocket. The sleeve would sit a little bit higher, and again, it's got the gap at the bottom to pop that through. So that is now an outside panel all assembled with the 2 pockets. We're moving to the pockets on the inside. And the first one is the cargo pocket, or Bellows, or Gusset. It's got a few different names. And you can customize this one to suit you. You don't have to follow the instructions that I've put in. I've gone for sort of sizes that I think were useful for stuff like a mobile phone, pens, other bits and pieces. But you can certainly change it. So for this one, I am doing the nice fabric from the outside. and then I'm using the waterproof canvas that I'm doing all the lining with. We're going to sew one of the long edges, so the top. So if you've got a directional print, make sure that this one's at the top. So clip that in place. And I'm going to sew along at that 1 centimetre 3/8 all the way along the top. Again, I like to finger press. Make a nice crease along the top. Will be top stitched. I think I will change thread. Again, I'm going to finger press this, and then if that doesn't work, I'll take it to the iron. Give it an iron press. I do like to avoid the iron as much as possible. I'm going to top stitch along that. There's a nice crisp line of stitching. I'm going to measure in from the right-hand side. This is where I'll get myself confused, left and right. 5 inches from the right-hand side. 5 inches there. Luckily, it's almost on that line there, which I will be able to use. So I think I'm just going to use this line rather than marking a new one. I'm going to put it so that the lining, the two right sides of the lining are facing each other. And I'm going to top stitch along that edge. It will be a little bit thick at the top there, so just take your time. So I'm going to hand wheel to get it started. That is the first crease in. So then from that fold, I'm going to measure across on this one. I'm going to make it large, so it's 8 inches or 20 centimetres. So again, that's lining up nicely. I only use this line here. Again, I'm going to fold that in. You can see this makes quite a big pocket. The smaller one would stop more in there. So I found the smaller one's good for like a mobile phone, whereas the bigger one, it will fit like a bullet journal or a pencil case. So it really depends on what you think you'll be storing into there as to whether you want a large or a small one. I'm going to do the same thing and sew down that edge. Now, because I've got grey and black, I'm going to start at the bottom of this one so it's grey on both of them. But that's just me being particular. That's not something you have to worry about. The next step is to get the lining panel. So we will be using the split panel for this. For the cargo pocket, make sure you have cut out the split lining, because this bottom edge will go in there. For now, put that split piece away. So after some unpicking, I've realised what my mistake is. Follow the instructions. But if you don't, if you're sort of freestyling, to get the pocket sitting properly, need to do is from both sides, clip in at the bottom, keep that back layer flat, and get an equal amount on each side of the pocket, and fold that down, and that's going to give you where you need to stitch. I'm going to clip that at the bottom. I'm quite happy with how that's sitting. Fold it up to the top. I'll show you the fold lines. That will become the stitch lines. So if you freestyle, that's how you can recover it. See on this side, see there's a nice fold line under there. I am quickly going to mark. I'm going to sew in this side first, and then I can do final adjustment on that side. That side sitting in, and I'm actually going to sew that down at 1/4 inch, 7 millimeters to hold it, because it will make getting this side a little bit easier. Now I'm just going to check that I'm happy with how that's sitting. And again, get that fold line. So it's sitting quite well. Looks good. Grab a marking implement and just mark that fold line. That will be my new stitch line. Obviously a lot easier just to follow the instructions. That's got the pocket fitting a whole lot better. It's going to do the cargo pocket. So I'm going to sew down right across the bottom now. We have the option here of adding some extra slip pockets. So it can be fun to do narrower ones for pens or other bits and pieces. It's really up to you as to whether if you're doing the big cargo pocket, you just leave it as is. I'm actually thinking about sewing, using the lines that are already here and putting just a little pen pocket. I think that will be super handy. And this will sit a little better. It's all assembled, but that is the large cargo pocket. To finish off, get the base. Have the cargo pocket right side up. Put that base so that the right sides are together so that the wrong side's facing you. It is a bit hard to tell with this double-sided, with this waterproof canvas. Clip it in place. And we're going to sew along the bottom. The fantastic thing about this is then all the bottoms of those pockets are now nicely caught inside. So on these bottom corners, it can get a little bit thick. You can hand wheel if you need to, go nice and slow. There is an optional step to put a row of top stitching along the bottom, which I'm going to do just to show the difference. I am going to change to black because, again, contrast top stitching is asking for trouble. that's the difference putting that row of stitching along the bottom makes. So not essential, but it does help it sit a little bit flatter. That is that side of the lining done. Next, I'm going to assemble the bottle glasses holder, the little slip pocket that goes on the side wall. I find it really good for glasses myself, so sunglasses, stuff like that, and it's right near the zipper, so it's really easy to reach in and grab. So take your two pieces, and we're going to sew along the top. And then repeat along the bottom. Flip it so it's nice and flat. If you did the trolley sleeve, this will look familiar. You're turning it right sides out. Again, finger press or iron. I'm going to change thread colours again. A bit consistent. I'm going to top stitch along this top edge. That is a tongue twister. So that's that edge nice. And we're going to finger press and fold and get the bottom edge looking really lovely too. What we'll be doing for the bottom is adding a gusset. We'll be folding it in so it's the same width as the lining bottom gusset piece. So you want that long gusset piece. You want to measure 1.5 inches down from that top edge, or 4 centimeters. And center the pocket. And just on each side, that in place. And do that for the other side. And grab your clips. So I've clipped each side in place. I'm going to baste those sides in. And make sure that I put it on the right side, which I have not. This is something that I do with waterproof canvas because it doesn't have the interfacing on the back. So we want the right side. Let's pop that pocket in again. Make sure the top stitch side is at the top. This side, time, the correct side. Clip it in, and you want to baste it in. So at that 1/4 inch, 7 millimeters, get it held in on each side. Then measure in from each side, and in the center, make a gusset. Now you can do it with the pleat on the outside. You can also do it with the pleat on the inside. Adjust it to suit you, how you'd like it to look, and sew across the bottom. So what I'm going to do is find that center. When you are sewing this, it is a little bit thick, so you may need a hump jumper. And the idea is you use the hump jumper to keep the presser foot flat. So as you sew across, put your hump jumper in, and so the sewing machine can stitch in the gap, and it keeps it nice and flat. That is the pocket at the side. So it's a nice basket shape that you can pop things in. It's just really good. It's right under that zipper, so you can just pop things in and easily grab them. So that is the water bottle. The next step is the zipper gusset. Again, zipper tape. Rather than measuring, I just eyeball most of the time. It's a little bit longer. Don't use your good scissors. Use some heavy scissors that aren't going to get damaged. And you want to put your zipper pulls on. Now, I'm going to use 2 zipper pulls. I find that just handier on a bag. So pop one in from one end. Pop the other one on. Always one. There it is. And again, make sure you seal those ends either with a glue or melting it. I'm going to use glue on this one. It's lots of hand, so I just put the fray stopper right along those ends. And give it a good generous amount on the back. Again, fray stopper along that end. A really generous amount on the back. So that's the zipper prepared. The key part to this assembly is making sure that you don't sew all the way across. So put the lining right side up, and I've made sure that I have got this right. That is the right side of the waterproof canvas. I'm going to put the zipper right side up, centering it. And then on the outside, there's one side that has the standard centimetre seam allowance, and on the other side, left a bigger space. This bigger space is the side that goes towards the zipper. That's going to mean that you're keeping that thick stabilizer outside of the zipper area so it doesn't get too thick. Then start clipping them together. When you get to the zipper pulls, again, I like to move them because they definitely make a bulge in the zipper tape. Pull them back to where we've already clipped. And this is the point where I like to check. So I have a look and go, yes, that's my outside, the zipper's the right way, my lining's the right way, happy with how it's all sitting, it's looking good. I've got the bulk out of where the zipper will be. We're going to sew along at 1/4 inch 7mm from that edge. Now, as you're sewing, keep an eye on this sandwich. Just make sure that your zipper hasn't slipped, that all your layers are together. I like doing just a chunk at a time and readjusting. That also reminds me that I need to move those zipper pulls when I come to them. And so all the way across that edge. At the zipper pulls, I'm going to move them. I lift the foot, move one, move the other, and then I can keep sewing. That is one side in, and you can see why it's great to leave that gap, because we're going to be top stitching, not through the thick part. So now we need to do the same on the other side. This can be where it's handy to do just an initial really quick finger press down, get that sitting. And sometimes even I'll just put a couple of clips just to make sure that that lining layer stays out of the way. It's really easy for that to flip up and get caught in the other side. And that is very frustrating. This is all a good press. So again, get that lining right side up. Match the lining pieces up. And then I'm going to put that outside right side down, and again, making sure that you've got the 1 centimeter at the bottom and that you're using that area that's got the larger bit without stabilizer. Make a zipper sandwich again on the other side. Again, when you get to those zipper pulls, you want to move them out of the way. Move these back into where I've already clipped. Now, if you're finding zippers super stressful, what you can do is just sew the zipper to the lining first and use a 3mm or an eighth of an inch stitch, and then put the top piece. So that way you don't have to worry about the lining and the zipper moving. It's just then putting two pieces together. But I find with practice, it gets a lot easier. And clip it all in place. Plenty of clips to hold it. And I can see so that's all nicely clipped in. This is all clipped away, so it's not going to get caught up underneath. And I'm going to sew along again, and you want it exactly the same as the other side. So like 1/4 of an inch, 7mm, use the same markings on your machine, because that way it's going to look consistent on the top of the zipper. I'm just going to adjust this a bit because it wasn't sitting just how I like it. Now, adjust as you go, keep checking, and that way you're making sure that things are going to line up the way that you want them when you're done. Again, give that a good finger press. You can really start seeing it come together, which is always exciting at this point. And now, top stitching. What I like to do is work it as I go. So Prep the beginning, sew a little bit, pull those layers, work from underneath. And just keep everything nice and tight and crisp and pull that bottom layer as tight as you can. I'm going to sew along at 1/4 of an inch, 7 millimeters, or whatever markings you have on your machine that makes it easy and makes it consistent. And again, with zippers, what you do on one side, you want to do on the other. Pull that bottom, adjust the top, keep it nice and crisp. When you get to the zips, move them out of the way. They won't make a huge impact. You also want to make sure that this side doesn't slip underneath. I just caught that one trying to slip, so I'm going to hook that. Again, pull that bottom layer, make a nice crisp fold. And then I'm going to turn it around and do the exact same thing on the other side without taking a break, because it will give me as consistent a finish as possible. I'm going to move the zipper pulls out of the way again. And keep pulling that lining. Zipper is installed and ready to go. Looking fantastic. So now it's time to assemble the gusset. We've got the zipper piece, we've got the outer, and we've got the inner. We'll start with the inner, the lining. Put that down right side facing up. Get your zipper gusset, and you want to match the bottom, the lining side, the bottom of the zipper with that gusset piece. For now, just a couple of clips to hold it all in place. We've got that zipper gusset right side facing up. You're going to get your outer, and you're going to put that right sides facing down. So once you've got all of that sandwiched together, just adjust it, make sure that it's all sitting nicely. If your zipper gusset size is out, you can always trim that down to match the bottom gusset. Mine is maybe 3 mils, an eighth of an inch, so I'm not going to worry about that. That's within tolerance. It's not going to make too much of a difference. So put that big sandwich together. This is really, really important. Don't sew the centimetre on each side. If you've got a nice obvious structure inside, like this deco, you can actually see, I don't want to sew here, I just want to sew along the top of it. I have just got a little bit of a corner missing, so I'll grab my tape measure. I'll mark in that centimetre, and if you go slightly even more than a centimetre, that's perfectly fine too. So it is quite a big sandwich and there's a lot going on, so take your time, go slowly. Hand wheel over the zipper, use a hump jumper for any thick parts. And again, just make sure that you're not sewing that first centimetre or the last centimetre. Hand wheel over that zipper. Don't sew all the way across. And we can double check on this side. We've got 2 gorgeous outsides. Flip it over. 2 fabulous insides. You can top stitch at this point if you'd like. I'd recommend, if you wanted to put the stitching, I would keep the lining out of it and I would just go across the top of the zipper there. And again, remembering you need to leave first and last centimetre, so don't top stitch the whole way across. Come in a centimetre and then start stitching. And we now need to repeat that for the other side. We want the outsides facing each other, the insides facing each other. I grab a couple of clips to start with. They will have, the bottom gusset is longer. That will start looking a bit odd at this point. But trust the process. So again, we're going to measure in a centimetre or 3/8 on both sides. Remembering that's at least, and we're going to sew across. Again, I'll check. Gusset looking fabulous, the outside and on the inside, and I've left that gap. So now we have the gusset piece ready to go. Now it's time to start the final assembly. You'll have noticed the notches on the pattern, and I have put a little bit of an explanation in. This is where they can come in really handy because you can line the notches up on the gusset with the corresponding notches on the panel, but don't stress too much about that. Another easy way of just making sure everything is lining up is to mark that center line on your panel and then do the same and mark, fold from those seams. So a notch is a tiny, tiny little snip. It's 3 millimeters, an eighth of an inch, just itty bitty tiny. It's just to show you where things are. Here I've just used pins because notches get lost when there's quite a few layers. I'll do the same on this one. I'll do the same on the base. I have notches, and also those markings from the feet, they're right at the center as well. So that gives me some good landmarks to use. And what we're going to do is place the panel with the top up. So that's the slip pocket, the zipper pocket, making sure the zipper pocket's open. We're going to take one of the gusset pieces. And for now, just pop it like that. What we'll do is find that notch at the top. We're going to match that and pop a pin there. We're going to pull this out of the way. It can even be helpful at this point to put a few clips along. That's going to help make sure that it doesn't get caught anywhere it shouldn't be. Let's move that piece out of the way. I'm going to find that notch or where the feet are at the bottom. And match that up. And then I like to just sort of get everything not sitting where it should. So just want to make sure that that piece is well out of the way. Everything's starting to sit together, and just slowly start to clip or pin all the way around. Got notches for these corner pieces. Just again, keep clipping. Going around a corner is always tricky because you do have to ease it. And the outside cut edge won't match because the line that we're actually trying to match is that stitch line that's 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch in. So you want where you're stitching to be smooth. So it means you will have a little bit of extra fabric on one side of that curve on the cut edge to get that stitch edge sitting nice. So it feels a little bit strange when you're doing it, and the cut edges aren't matching up. But that is definitely how it's supposed to be. And really the secret to this bag at this point is just taking your time, clipping it all together, matching those marks or notches, having faith that it all fits together. Promise it does. There's definitely one where you will need all your clips. Remember how we left that 1 centimetre? That's so this lining piece can be folded out, and when you stitch the outside, you're not going to sew the lining. You're going to sew right on that centimetre with that lining piece folded out of the way. Super important to do that. This is the magic that means we don't need binding. Well, I'm going to sew half, and then I'm going to clip the other side and do the other half. It's just a little bit easier to take this in stages rather than trying to tackle absolutely everything at once. I'm going to add some of these big clips. You can also use staples. So the beauty of staples, you sort of want them that 1/4 inch, 7 millimeters. So they're well outside of where you're stitching, but they'll help hold everything together and they've got a bit of movement. So use whatever you need that's going to work for you. For me, I like clips, and I definitely like doing just bits and not trying everything at once. I'm going to start from, so that's the halfway point. I'm actually going to start from a bit further along. And this bag will also be a little bit of a workout at this point. Just take your time, nice and slowly. When you come to these corners, just remember that you will have one side that's a little bit puckered and one side that's quite tight, because you want that stitch line to be perfectly smooth, not those raw edges. So even a trusty screwdriver can be really great to help maneuver things around and keep your fingers out of the way, or the corner of a hump jumper, or whatever you've got around, or if you've got a stiletto or a particular tool, that can be great. And just use that, pull things, adjust it, go nice and slow, remember to breathe, and just trust that the pattern does go together. I'm getting down towards where all the gusset sandwich is, so I just really want to make sure all those pieces are well out of the way. And if it means that you end up stitching a little less than a centimetre, that's fine. Use some more clips on this corner. I'm going to stop there and then reset for the other side. This gives me a chance to just clip that gusset piece out of the way and make sure I'm not accidentally stitching it. You can also just check and make sure that you're happy with how those corners are sitting. So again, you can see one side's tight, one side's got ease, but that's exactly how it's supposed to be to get those corners sitting nice and flat. Do the same again. Line up those notches. Again, want to make sure that that lining's well out of the way. And that we're just sewing the outside layers. Everything's sitting nicely. Now I'm going to sew the rest. And again, taking my time, going slowly, remembering to breathe. using some help around those corners if I need it. That is one side sewn in. This is where you can check and see, make sure that you're happy with how it's going to sit. Now, it might not be perfect on the inside, but it's going to look fantastic from the outside. If you're worried about strain on these stitches, you can put a second row of stitching all the way around. Just make sure that it's inside the seam allowance. And what I like to do sometimes is actually sew from the other side. So I sewed this one from this direction. So if I'm doing the second row of stitching, I'll do it from the other side completely. And I just want it a pin width, an eighth of an inch, 3 millimeters at the most away from that first line of stitching. That can also help with grinning, where the seams are under a lot of strain and they just start showing their stitches. So I'm going to go right the way around. It's a little tricky. Make sure again that that lining isn't pulled up, and because I'm going from this side, I can't actually see the lining. So I need to be extra careful on those corners. This is also the point usually where my sewing machine will probably run out of thread. So keep that in mind too. You don't want to do air stitching. That is very, very frustrating. So I'm going to put that second row around now. So that is the second row of stitching in. Make sure I'm happy with all of that. And I am. And there is a lot that you can fix too with the iron afterwards. That looks fantastic. That is one side panel in. So now that one side is in, I'm going to put the other outer piece in. And it's a bit of rinse and repeat. Match all those lines up, match the centers, get it all lined up. Take your time. And slow and steady. And again, do it in multiple parts. Don't feel like you have to do the whole bag all at once. And remembering you probably will need to clip that gusset lining out of the way because it is going to want to fall in. So I'm just going to sew this half to start and then move the clips to the other side. And this is where it starts to get to be quite a workout. So just going to open the top zipper. That will help a little bit. If it does get a little bit out of hand, just stop, readjust, start again. That corner ended up just getting caught on the deco. Another trick with the corners is to push them all the way flat like that. And that will get it sitting a little bit better. And I might start sewing from this direction and go back around. So don't be afraid to switch and swap and just get the angle that works best for you. Because she's definitely a big bag at this point. So that is that whole side in. And even though this corner, I did do a little bit of unpicking, it's now sitting really, really nicely. So if it does just go haywire, just reset, restart, and then let's get the last bit all finished. Now I'm going to sew around that last bit. Again, just making sure that that lining's free. And that is the outer completely assembled. You can put these curves if you'd like, get a bit of bulkiness out of those corners. And again, you can put that second row of stitching around to stop the grinning if you would like. And I do like to have a look at this point because it is exciting when it really starts coming together, looking like an extra cool bag. The next step is the lining. So you'll have the gusset and the zipper already in. It's the two side pieces. If you have a mesh pocket, that would be on this side. I'm going to put this one away to one side and do the cargo pocket piece first. Now, I find it easier to do a little bit at a time on this and secure it in, especially with the waterproof canvas. I find it's just a little bit more slippery and my clips don't hold as well. What I'm going to do is actually tuck in this side, just like that, get it out of the way because we're going to be sewing to this side. So that's the top of the bag, it's the top of my lining. Find that center or use the center notch. Clip it in place. So I'm going to sew all across that top edge just to anchor it in. This is where it does get to be a little bit of a workout as you maneuver things around your machine. So now that that top seam's sewn in, we're going to attach the other side of the gusset. This is where it can get a little bit confusing, but we want to be sewing, we sewed at the top on this side, we want to be sewing on this side, so even popping a clip on can help. So we want to be sewing to that side. This piece, that's all the way over here, so you're actually pulling this piece up and sewing here. So with that center notch, sure you find the two notches and match them together. What you have basically is the lining on this side and everything underneath. I'm going to sew across that bottom, and that's going to make doing this last little side bits just that little bit easier. We can sew along there and do the same on the other side. So again, go nice and slow and steady. Don't rush. And let's get that base nice and secured in. Now the top and bottom are in, it's those sides. So now that that top and bottom is nicely secured, we can tackle the slightly trickier part, the sides. Again, match those notches up. And I find the waterproof canvas moves a little bit, so I'm going to use pins. And you could even use staples at this point if you're finding it moves. A cotton lining won't move as much. It'll be just a little bit easier to move around. So remember, there'll be some ease in those corners, same as on the outside. Just work that around. When I am pinning the waterproof canvas, I'm making sure that I stay within the seam allowance. So that way there won't be holes and it keeps the integrity of the bag. Now for this part here, I've put my zipper foot on, so I'm actually going to use the zipper foot to get nice and close there. You don't want to sew the outside, you just want to sew the inside, and that's why we left that 1 centimetre gap when we joined the two pieces together. All clipped in. I'm going to quickly sew just that extra tricky part, and then that will make everything else a little bit easier. Be as rough as you need to move that out of the way without tearing, of course. Put all of that out of the way. Keep sewing along this side. You may want to change from a zipper foot here, so the zipper foot won't pull the fabric through as evenly. It's really up to you and what's working on your machine. Here's the base. Now I'm going to finish that top corner. Easier from this side, I can pull most of the bulk out of the way. That is one side in. And now it's a case of rinse and repeat on the other side. So again, push that side that we're not working on well out of the way. This is where you just want to keep pushing that bag down, keep working those corners, moving things out of the way. And go nice and slow. But now that I've got that side in nice and secure, I'm going to sew along again. I'm going to start at this tricky bit with the zipper foot just to hold that in place, because you can see with the bulk of the bag it does get just a little bit tricky here. But don't be afraid to squish it, to move it. Once it's all done, we can iron it, get it looking beautiful again. I'm going to go from this side and push all of that out of the way. Try not to pin myself. Corner just held in place. That's going to make everything a lot easier to do. In this corner. Here's the facing. And now it's this corner at the top. I'm going to go from this direction. I'm very good at jabbing myself with pins. That's why I usually don't use them. They help sometimes in tricky parts like this. If you've got a free arm on your machine, this can be a great spot to use that, but mine has no free arm. Just going to flip it over to the other side. Finish that last little bit. And that's got it in. None of it's particularly difficult sewing. It's just a little bit fiddly. Now, I need to flip it all around. Put the other side in. So now it's time for the other side of the lining. Now, the great thing about leaving the gap at the bottom is we don't have to worry about sewing that bit. We're going to sew the top down to the sides and just around the corners, leave a lovely big turning gap. As you can see, what I've done is this is the right side of the bag there. That is the other side of the lining, and I've tucked it all in to try and get it out of the way. So we're going to sew that top bit first and get that nice and secured. That's nice and easy. And then we'll do just the edges of the bottom. And then the same thing as before, zipper foot at the sides, sew that in and sew that in. Again, take your time, move stuff around. This is one of those things that if you're doing it in a factory that have a cylinder arm machine, they wouldn't have to change it backwards and forwards. You can still do it at home. It just takes a little bit longer, but it's going to be great results and it's well worth it. I'm going to grab my lining piece and just making sure that if there is a top, if you put a zipper pocket in or the mesh pocket, that the top is at the top. Again, line up those notches. And clip or pin it all in place. So right across that top. Easier from this side. Pop a couple of pins in, again, keeping them by the seam allowance. That is that top side in. Flip it over to the bottom. We're going to leave this open because that's where we're going to turn the bag through. And I'm going to line up this side. So that's all pinned in, ready to go. I'm going to use that zipper foot at this little tricky part here. And get that held in place first. And just pull as much of the bag out of the way as possible. And this side. It's going to be the easiest. That is one side in. Now flip over and sew the top in. Now it's on to the final side to finish that off, remembering that we are leaving that nice turning gap. And I'm going to use the zipper foot again in this little bit here that's just a bit tricky. So this is where you just go nice and slow again. Take your time, no rush. And I'm going to use a lot of pins and a lot of clips and really hold it all into place. Smoosh stuff out of the way. Because what we can do is once it's all done, grab the iron, use a hammer or a towel on the inside and iron everything and get it nice and crisp. I'm going to use my pins, my clips, and let's get going. I'm going to start sewing that tricky bit first, and then I'll sew the other edges in, and that will be the lining done. And the next step is turn through. So this is where it gets so exciting. If I do go from this side, I can squeeze that out of the way. Just maneuver it under the foot. I've got all the way down that side done. So now I've just got this top little corner, and I'm going to go from this side because I think it will make it a little bit easier. Meet up to that stitching there. Just push as much as you can out of the way. I might even change my other foot. It just gives a bit more balanced feeling to sewing. Go. And this is where it gets to be a bit of a workout. So flick it around, maneuver it in. In. Started. That is the lining all ready to go. So now all the lining's sewn up, it's time to turn the bag through. Left this nice generous turning gap here. It's going to be a lot easier than doing it through the bottom of the zipper pocket. When I'm turning through, I like to fold the base like that and pull that through. So I'm going to reach from the inside, pull those two corners, and then pull that through. On the other side, I'll reach in. And I've got the two corners there. Just going to work that through. Got the bag inside out now. We've pulled that outside. This is where I go then back through that hole in the lining. Start to push those corners out. If there's any threads, give them a trim. Same on the other side. This is where you can just make sure everything's sitting nicely, that you're happy with those corners. I find with the deco, you can give it a bit of a finger press, or you could even do this with an iron, and that's going to give you a nice crisp corner. That on the other side. And then I'm going to get in, I've got a tailor's ham, but if you don't have a tailor's ham, you can use a rolled up towel, push it into those corners, and I'm going to iron and get it sitting crisp. But before that, we have bag feet to finish installing. So remember, we got up to the point where we put the holes through. They're all ready to go. This is where the big hole at the base is an advantage again. So I'm going to take the screw and the washer, prep that. Find my hole. Push it all the way through so that screw is showing. You can put a dab of glue on at this point, just if you're worried about them coming undone. I'm not going to worry. And then start twisting that off. And then from the inside, grab your screwdriver. Pop it in. Hold that foot. And screw it in nice and tight. And that's the foot installed. So I'm going to do that all along. If you find after all the movement that you can't get through, you can use your awl again or anything on hand. Go back through that hole and just make sure and that is bag feet installed. So once you've given it a good press, you're happy with it, you've checked all the seams, you've got the feet on, it's time to close up the two gaps. So we have the gap in the lining and the gap in the bottom of that zipper pocket. So what we're going to do is through the zipper pocket, I'm going to reach in and grab that lining and just pull a little bit of it out. There it is there. There, I found the start. I'm going to pop a few pins in. Down the other side. Pin. This is another one where I would do it in two parts, just because it's a little bit fiddly and you're sort of reaching through that zipper pocket and you don't want to pull too hard because you've got the outside sitting so nicely. So again, just maneuver everything around on your sewing machine. It is a bit of a workout. So as I'm going, I'm checking to make sure that I'm just sewing those two layers, that nothing else is getting caught in there. Pulling more through. Just going to back stitch here. That part's done. I'll tuck that in. And then I'll pull the other side out a little bit more so I can work on it. Re-clip that. And that's the lining sewn up. Pull it back through that zipper pocket, put it inside, and there's now no hole inside. You don't have to do that step, but if you're using thicker deco or anything that's just a bit difficult to pull through, it's a lot easier to use a larger turning gap. That leaves us then with the bottom of the zipper pocket. Again, I like to do this in 3 steps. You can just go all the way across all at once. What I like to do is close up the sides just a little bit because I'm going to machine stitch across the gap. If you're hand sewing, you're probably fine not to worry about this part. I'm not very good at hand sewing, so I would rather machine stitch. So I'm going to sew a little bit in from one side. I'm going to do the same on the other side. So by sewing those two edges, I've got a bit smaller. Yeah. So what can be fun at this point is if you've got a sew-in label. So I could put one of these just in, and then clip those two edges together. Make sure it's sitting nice and flat. I put the label in, put it there to hold that. And what I like to do is actually put a pin in through just where the stitching started, because that helps me make sure that I'm getting sewing between those two pins of exactly where it needs to be. And when I'm putting it in the machine, I like to have this bottom edge, sort of bottom layer, I peek it out just ever so slightly so I can make sure that I'm sewing both layers, because I find if I don't do that, the bottom layer will just start slipping away and it'll end up like that and won't be caught in the stitching. So if I can eyeball it, I know that I'm sewing it. It hasn't moved on me. Again, maneuver the rest of the bag around the machine as you need to. That is my pocket sewn. Trim those threads. That can go back inside. And that is the bag completely finished. In the instructions, I say do the straps first. Here is me doing the straps after the bag's been made. I'm using webbing rather than the fabric straps. So the first thing, of course, I'm going to do is tidy these edges, and you either want to glue or melt them a little bit. So you do not want your webbing to fray. Find a fresh cut and then melting it with the lighter. And you do want to melt, you don't want to burn. And then I check so I can see that that didn't work as well as I wanted. Let's trim that off. Melt from the other side. Let it cool a bit and then check. And I can see that time it's worked. Do the other side. And that's worked well. You don't want to melt too much because you can get quite big, thick, chunky bits and they can break a needle. That is my webbing. I've got my clips and my slider. I recommend playing a few times at first because this can be a little bit tricky to make sure that you've got everything fed on in the right way. You want to start with your slider. Just feed that straight on. Then you want one of your clasps. Feed that on. So you've got the top of the slider, the clip, turn it over, take that tail, and you want to feed it under the bar. So at this stage, you've got a loop. This is the bit that always tripped me up at the start, where this tail gets attached. It gets attached back to itself underneath that slider. So I'm just going to clip that. So this gives you an opportunity to check and make sure, yep, that slider still works. The clip's doing what I want. Everything's in the right way. Got a loop like that. And now we're going to sew the little tail back on itself. You can, if this ends looking a little bit messy, you can fold it under. But again, that can get a little thick to sew. And particularly on this side, it's all hidden underneath the slider. So I am going to clip that, fold it, and I'm going to sew 2 rows across. You don't want to make this tail too short because you are sewing next to the slider. So this gives me plenty of room to work with. And give yourself plenty of slack in here so you can keep that clasp out of the way. I'm going to sew 1 row and then a second row. My first row in, course, with the black, it's a little bit difficult to see. Just double check and make sure I'm happy with that. I don't need the clips now because it's nice and secure. And I'm going to put a second row across. You can also pop a rivet in, and in the instructions I've got the steps to do the cross if you would like to do that. So that is one side in. What I'm going to do is adjust it right down. Because now we're going to put the other side in. The trick is you want the clip the right side up. So this is the right side, this is the wrong side. So when we put this clip on, right side of the slide is there, put the clip through and fold that under. And then that way it's right side, right side. I'm going to do the same again, 2 rows of stitching. You can check under here, make sure it's about the same. And this one, because it's on its end on it out on the own, you can sort of fold it under if your machine's handling the bulk well. And that can give a nice cleaner finish. And what I do when I'm doing that is I put that end with all the melty bits right up near the bar, because you can't actually get in that close to sew most of the time. So that way I know I'm not going to be sewing over any thick melted bits of the webbing. So I have smashed a needle doing that before. It is something I now bear in mind. And when sewing this one, it's easier to sew it from this side because you can see that fold, but this side is the top. And so if there's a real difference between the top side of your stitching and the bobbin side, it can be better to sew this top side first. And what I do is I just feel that fold and line things up. So I put the edge of my foot where the fold is and just come in slightly. You may need to use a hump jumper. And if you're having a real difficulty starting, start a bit further in, go back, and then come forwards again. And then if you pop the hump jumper in behind, it's going to keep that foot nice and level. Start. Back. In that thread, check that I'm happy, and I just sew another row. For my second row of stitching, I went right up close, so that's not going to wiggle around at all. That is the adjustable strap. This one in webbing. And that's the bag finished and ready to go.